Akram here, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create some basic models in 3D Studio Max. So I have a new scene right here opened up in 3ds Max, and I've already set my project folder and everything, so my project is ready to go. I'm going to go over to the command panel over here, and on the create tab I have all the built-in objects to create in my scene. So I'll start with the box here just to give you an idea, and I need to choose which viewport to create in. Typically you don't want to create your objects in the perspective window because it's hard to tell if the object is actually on the plane as you create them. Instead you typically want to start in one of the orthographic views. And I'll go ahead and do this in the top view here. So for the box, I'm just going to click on the left button to activate it, and I'm dragging out the rectangle. Once I get the rectangular shape that I want, I click go of the left button, and then I can start to move my mouse up, creating the height of my box. So now you can see that I have my box in here. And if I click on the item, you'll see that it's got a little sort of heel outline around it. I'm going to go to the Modify tab. And under the Modify tab, it gives me the properties for this box. So at the very beginning, I want to give my box a name because all shapes are just incrementally labeled. So I'm just going to call this one My Box. When creating your objects, the color is whatever the last color setting was. So with my box selected, I'm going to click on the little color icon beside it. And this opens up the object color dialog. Typically, you're going to be creating materials to put on these objects. The colors are just there sort of as placeholders and to make it easy to differentiate different objects in your scene. So I'm going to go with, say, like this lavender color here. And I now have this box. You'll also notice that with the box selected, I have the parameter settings. So I have my length, height, and width. And I'm going to go ahead and let's say I want to do a length of 10, a width of 10, and a height of 10. And I got my length as 110. Let's change that back to 10. There we go. Now I have made this, and my units are actually set up in meters currently. So it's a huge box. So I need to zoom out. And I can do that in individual viewports, but it's probably best if I just do zoom extent selected and zoom extent selected all so that it zooms up in all of the views. I'm going to use my zoom all here so that I can kind of zoom out of my scene a little bit. Going back to my create tab, and you'll notice I have several different objects that I can work with. I can also create spheres. I can create a cone simply by clicking and dragging out the diameter of the cone, the height of the cone, and then moving left or right to create the tip of the cone. There's lots of different ones in here, and whenever you have it selected, you can go back to the Modify tab and change the settings. Again, the colors are kind of randomized, and you can change those colors as needed. I do encourage you to experiment with these objects, play around with them, see what they do, see how you create them. Again, it's a click and drag and typically move left or right to create height and depth. You'll also notice when viewing your objects in the scene, we are looking at the scene in different display modes. Our perspective scene is always using a default shading, so it's creating a solid object, while our orthographic views are typically set to a wireframe, so we can see through the objects and get a sense of where they are in their size and scale and shape. If I were to click where it says wireframe here and I right click, I can actually change those settings. So I can say for the front view here, I want this shaded as well. Now again, this doesn't really do a whole lot when you're manipulating the objects as far as shape. You want to be able to see all those points on the object. So I'm going to change this back to the wireframe mode. In the perspective window, again, typically it's set to default shading, so you can get more of a sense of how the framing of the scene looks versus manipulating the individual objects. However, if I click on the default shading here, I can also do edge face, which allows me to have a shaded object, but also see a wireframe outline over the shadedness of the object. And this is another way to make it easier to see all the points of the object that can be manipulated. I'm going to go ahead and turn off edge facing so that we just have shaded back inside of this view. Along with creating objects, you can also modify those objects. So if I click on my cone here, for instance, I go to the Modify tab, you can see that there is a modify list, and there are a ton of different modifiers, and we'll be going through and looking at a whole bunch of these. But right now, again, I encourage you to just experiment and see what they do. For example, let's say I want to add a bend to this. So I can change the angle of the bend. There we go. Look at that. I'm bending this little cone, and so it's pointing different directions. I can also change the axis on which that bend is on. I kind of like the Z axis. So you can quickly add a modifier, and you'll notice that in your modify list up here, it's actually almost stacking the modifiers. So at any point in time, I can turn off the bend and see what the cone looks like without the bend on, and then I can turn the bend back on. If I need to modify the root object, I can go back to the cone and change it. And that is the gist of creating a few basic shapes inside of 3D Studio Max and adding a few modifiers. Again, the best way to learn how to use 3D Studio Max is to simply start playing around with it and seeing what you can do. I hope you found this lesson informative, and don't forget to check out other lessons and tutorials on the channel. So what are you waiting for? Get creative today.